Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Stratosphere Lounge. I'm your host, Bill Whittle. As you can immediately determine, the Florida hare has gone the way of the dinosaurs for another month or two. Uh, Spent, I don't know, 9 or 10 hours beating it into submission yesterday with the harshest chemicals known to man, and I'm feeling great. So I got I'm rocking the Malibu Einstein looking again, and I'm a happy camper. I hope everybody's doing well. It's Moon Day the 20th of July, and it's just I don't know. I've been doing a lot of been living a lot of the Apollo dream lately, and I don't know, I just think it's fantastic. There's a guy out there who's got a YouTube channel. I might have mentioned him before. Some, hang on. He's the guy I was talking about. I think last time. I know tonight's the politics night, but just real fast, he does all these tremendous launch videos, and Hayes Gray Art, I think it is, and he has spent. I can't even imagine how much time he spent, but he did an animation of uh, of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin's moonwalk, and it's sped up time, but every single footstep is in the right place. I can't find it. I'm not going to worry about it now. I'll put a link up there if I can remember when we post it. But it's just so accurate, and I'm looking at this, and I've had experience with research, and I've had some experience with animation too, and I'm just blown away by the care that went into this, because he's got the lem in the right part of the moon, obviously, and then the second they depressurize the hatch, he starts the clock, and every lem's a tiny little thing, because he's zoomed out enough so you can see where they're walking, and everywhere they walk, they leave little tracks, and that whole first EVA, which was 43 years ago today, was you could practically touch the lem the whole time, and then he just goes to a little walk. Anyway, it's tremendous, and I don't. I'm determined, like I say, as much as possible to not cross the stream. So this is certainly not our entertainment night, but because it is Moon Day, I have actually been making a great deal of progress. Finally, on the Major Mace Mattingly thing, after just banging my head against the wall for 3 months. I'm just zooming now. One of the big concerns I had was whether a lot of people said, "Well, you get Zoe to do the some of the voices," which I've said is great. I've got to capture it in real time because I got to match the lips. So I was thinking about going with synthesized voices, and so I gave that a try, and I'm real happy with it. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to play something for you, and then it's only 30 seconds, and then we'll come back and we'll get into the political world. So first I'll go to the Stratosphere Lounge screen, and then we'll take a look at that, and then we'll come right back. So everybody just cool your jets for a second here. Uncool your jets, actually, because I know I'm going to hear about this. This is simply a voice test. The suits are not working real well. The head's bouncing around. The helmet's not moving. It's just the voice and the face. That's it. Okay, cool your jets again.
Well, now's a chance for us to see just how good this thing really is. It's kind of cool, I have to say. I just hope it translates as well as, well, should translate better than the other one because it's newer and had to get this, you know, extra face motion capture device. So if it's not any better, then I'm just going to have some kind of major cal, I imagine.
So who was that incredible voice actor that we brought in? Well, it's none other than yours truly. And I've been working up against the deadline here. It wasn't. I didn't have to have it for this show. I'll have it for Monday for sure. But I actually did that same little piece of audio that you heard. That was me, and I morphed it probably 7, 8 times to try and get stuff that was different. And then I got 4 different voices, and I put that same exact dialogue on all 4 of those voices, different voices on different characters, and it's great. It's great. This Mercury suit's given me a lot of problems because the helmet is not attached to the head. It's a long story, but in any event, the 4 voices sound very, very different. What doesn't sound different is the cadence, and that's something that I can achieve by doing intentionally. I just did a quick off the cuff read, but so I have to be sure to write these guys with different sounding dialogue, and then I have to do the cadences have to be different. Have to be slower, and some guys are a little more inflective than others, and anyway, the thing that I was most happy about is that the quality of the 4 voices were really, really good. And right now, actually, they're a little bit too close together. Got to separate them out a little bit, but they're going to be good enough. And I really am very relieved to see that. So it was cool. We'll have a bunch more of that on Monday. So other than the fact that today's the anniversary of the high point of human civilization, I don't know really what much else there is to say. The world continues to go about its business, and I do not know what exactly is going on. I just have a feeling that we turned the corner of my show for tomorrow on right angles. I don't want to mess up this masterpiece. Let me get this exactly right. Hang on a second here. So my segment tomorrow is about a movie that Disney is about to release. It just did the trailers for, and I'm sure it'll ring a bell for all of you. It's a childhood classic for so many of us. Here we go. Yes. I did a segment on the upcoming Disney release, which is called Snow White and the 7 Stunning and Brave Non-Binary Individuals of Color, some of whom may or may not suffer from achondroplasia. And it's as catchy as it sounds. You really do have to ask yourself, what's the point? But it was an interesting discussion because apparently Peter Dinklage came out and said that any time a dwarf is playing a dwarf, it's demeaning and degrading, and he's managed to convince the studios that it's demeaning and degrading, and therefore hateful and racist and white supremacist, patriarchy and all that. And then there's a whole bunch of other actors who are dwarves, call themselves dwarves, seem to be perfectly proud being dwarves, who aren't working now because Peter Dinklage, who's I'm sure multi-millionaire at this point, has decided that it's demeaning. I've got a clip from Piers Morgan where he's got a small actor on there, and I think the guy's also like a wrestler or something, and he says, "What's the problem? I'm a dwarf. That describes who I am. I don't get to play Indiana Jones. I might have a chance to do something like this in a major motion picture once in my life, and I'd kind of like to do it. But no, there's a young, rich, white, woke liberal there explaining to this actual dwarf that the term dwarf is offensive and that he shouldn't call himself a dwarf. He should call himself a person with dwarfism. And at this point, this is when the circuit breakers just started to, click off. David Booty says doesn't even get to play Delaware Jones. Clever. Rhode Island Jones, maybe. That's clever. But the thing I loved about that particular clip's on Piers Morgan, who is showing more and more sense as I get older. Either that or the mind is going, or probably both. But this guy was just so adamant about it, and the dwarf, I used to refer to them as little people. I think that's what they used to want to be called, and I'm fine. I'm a friendly guy. I just happy to call you whatever you want to be called. I'm just not going to take a knee and tell me that you're, you know, NFL. I'm sorry, NBA basketball player.
It's the process of political correctness where it's the definition they find offensive and not the actual words.
There's some kind of strange echo coming in from the air conditioning here. Yes, as Clay said, who apparently for the last several months has been sleeping outside the door. I didn't want to embarrass him, but it's getting a little old. Yes, so it's all about the action. So it's an interesting dynamic watching this young woke British d-bag telling an actual dwarf that he should be offended about the term dwarf, while the dwarf is saying that's what I am, and I really like that whole dynamic. So, rather fond of this line because it was an ad lib. So the trailer for Snow White has a description of Snow White from the book, and the trailer says, lips as red as roses, hair as black as ebon, and 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Because if you haven't heard, it's a Latinx. You heard me. I said Latinx, playing Snow White, whose skin is white as snow, but that was left out of the trailer. I'm not really going to get into this whole thing again. It's more of an entertainment issue again. But basically, the reason I bring it up is because the comments on the trailer, and I mean, I went 50 or 60 deep, and every single one of them was mocking, and none of them were mean. They were all just mocking, and they were mocking it the same way that they were mocking Rings of Power, which is to the way the gag works is this thing has gotten so far away from what it claims to be that you can just chuck everything else in there, might as well. So some of the comments are, my favorite part of the trailer is when she stands up and goes, "It's snowing time," or when she stands there and says, "I want you to meet my little friends," and just hilarious. People just laughing at it, and so when you're at the laughing at it point, you're actually, I think, pretty close to coming out of some of this fog. We'll see, but one way or another, we'll still be there. And so will the country. And so will most of the people. As far as the government goes and some of the other people, that's in play. But, one of the things I like most about this Mace Mattingly thing, or any other work of fiction, is that it allows me to do both sides of the argument. And that's handy. From a dramatic point of view. Well, it's going to blow your minds, kids, but we're going straight to the questions. Can you believe it? It's true. It's too true. While we're waiting, Natasha got her driver's license a couple days ago. She's been here 7 years. She was in a couple of serious rear-end collisions back in Russia, and she had gotten a pretty healthy PTSD experience out of that. So she was always very worried about it, and LA is not the friendliest place to drive. However, she just went out there, got the written test, aced that, and then took driving lessons with an instructor, and I did a fair amount of the instructing myself, and now she's driving my Camaro around while I'm sitting here, and that's not a problem. The only thing that's interesting about that is if there is a car that was ever designed to be less friendly to a new driver, I'm pretty sure that the new model Camaro is it. The windows are this high, it's like looking out of a food slot in a prison cell. It's not the best visibility in the world, but she is having a blast, and that makes me happy. So when she's happy, I'm happy. When I'm happy, everybody's happy. So here we go. Let's see what we got here. I have to log in. I spent Oh well, I won't repeat that, Marisha. Living your own private shame there. The just before we get into the questions, I've been spending a lot of time on free time. I've been on this Tighten Sub thing. It's been about a month now, almost. I guess, or more, something close to that. And every day, I get more and more embarrassed that I defended this guy as as an entrepreneur. I mean, this thing. There's a transcript out there. We don't know if it's real or not. Some people swear it's fake. Other people, if it's a fake transcript from the Titan before it imploded, it's a damn good fake. It's got the ring of truth to it. But in any event, whether that happened or not, now you're finding out things like on the last dive or two, they're nothing like that kind of depth, and these guys are inside this tube and they hear like these loud bangs like gunshots on the outside of the shell, and that's just some of the carbon fiber delaminating, and it really just does boggle the mind, the arrogance of this guy, and not just the arrogance, the deceitfulness of him is really coming out now. I was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, and I did for a while, but now it's, people say, well, I don't know, no one's ever tried carbon fiber before. Well, don't you worry, we've designed this in cooperation with Boeing and NASA. And you contact Boeing and NASA, and they say, we don't know anything about this. Boeing sold him the carbon fiber to make the cylinder out of, but the reason that he got the carbon fiber from Boeing was because it was expired carbon fiber. It was no longer viable for aircraft. Its shelf life had expired, so I'm sure he got it on the cheap. And everything else about that thing seems to be on the cheap. And the thing that interests me is not so much the dynamics of what happened to those 5 people, is just the dynamics of how you get so isolated, so ego isolated in your bubble. I think it's not. Just flew into my head, but really, Stockton, Rush, and Vladimir Putin kind of operating in the same sort of mind space. They're determined to believe something. Any evidence that backs up what they want to believe is clung to and broadcast as widely as possible. Anything that goes contrary to what you want to believe is immediately tossed out the door, and the messenger's shot and kicked out the door as well. And this sense of just this staggering sense of narcissistic certainty, and I am, I'm just amazed every single day as more and more of this stuff comes out. I'm just more and more amazed at the kind of corners this guy cut, and it's tough. I had said last time I spoke about this, which was weeks ago, right shortly after it happened, that at least it's a 7-8 millisecond event. It takes your brain probably 11 or 12 milliseconds to perceive sight. So I thought, okay, well, at least they're listening to music, they're smiling, they're talking about the fun times they're going to have, and then just in the middle of a sentence, just lights out. But now it's beginning to look like they knew there were problems, and if the transcript is real, then they were trying to come back up, and that's not. I'd be willing to bet you if it turns out if it turns out the transcript is true, I was thinking, what was that conversation like? And I'd be willing to bet you a fair amount of money that the entire time between when they were aware there was a problem and then when they were suddenly just lights out, I'd be willing to bet you that Stockton Rush was spending the entire time telling everybody that this is nothing to worry about. And that's the kind of arrogance that that we should be careful about falling into. This is echo chamber stuff. This is why we listen to alternative viewpoints, and no matter how much they enrage you, you still have to listen to the other side's argument and defeat it, I think. But Eric says the fact that he went on the voyage with the customers raises the question: was he suicidal or just full of arrogance at the quality of his tin can? He was 100% full of arrogance at the quality of his carbon fiber can. You don't get on a vehicle like that if you have doubts about it, or at least serious enough doubts. And I think he put himself so far into this mindset that I suspect that even if Stockton Rush knew that there was a good chance this thing would crack, he still would have gone, because it's, where do you go back from there? You can't repair it. This delamination was apparently additive over a number of dive cycles. And so what's he going to do? I'm not saying what's he going to do. Everybody knows what a normal, decent, honest person would do. They'd say, well, we've been down on 6 dives and we survived, and every time we came up, the sub got weaker and weaker and weaker, and we've been doing non-destructive testing, and the thing's completely delaminated. It's a bloody miracle, frankly, that we got back at all. So we are going to put this one on the shelf, and I'm going to get a job at Target, or something along those lines. But once you get that deep into it, you're pot committed. Everything you've got is in there, and I'm not happy about him dying or anybody else dying, but it would have been an entirely different thing if it turned out that he didn't go on that dive. If it turned out he was sitting in up on the recovery ship, then that would be, just insane. But it's a real wake up call, and many people. Cameron, I think, was the first I heard to talk about this. It's just basically interesting that they repeated the same error that sank the Titanic in the first place. No, it's unsinkable. Well, you're going full speed into a field of icebergs out there. You're pretty much at full speed. The Titanic's under ruddered, Captain Smith. You know that already from your experiences already on your shakedown cruise, that it's under ruddered. Yeah, but we can set a record, and probably won't happen, and it probably wouldn't happen. I just got to get this out. I said this a lot 15 years ago. This is just one little piece of information. So, obviously, if these lookouts had seen the iceberg 7-8 seconds earlier, Titanic would have been able to turn, miss the iceberg, and continue on and survive. But what most people don't realize is if they'd seen the iceberg even 4 or 5 seconds later, they would have survived. Because if they'd seen the iceberg just 4 or 5 seconds later, they would have hit the iceberg bow on, and you would have lost the first compartment or 2 compartments. Titanic could float with 5 flooded, but not 6. And if it had smashed directly into the iceberg, there undoubtedly would have been scores, if not hundreds, of people killed from the collision, but the ship wouldn't have gone down. And so it's not like there was this little tiny window where they could have escaped. It's a little window. It's probably an 8-second window where they sighted the iceberg too late to be able to avoid it and too early to hit it head on. It's a little 8-second window somewhere in that neighborhood, and they managed to find it. And this is the price of hubris, and we saw it with Challenger, and we saw it with Columbia, and all the rest of it. It's a bad place to be. Jonathan Arnold has a nice super chat here. I'm glad Natasha's okay. I know recovery from that can be very difficult. She's a very strong woman. She is. She's strong and brave. And I'd love to tell you she's absolutely fearless, but she's not, and that's even more impressive, frankly. So, in any event, I'm very proud of her. And by the way, 7 years later, she's just suddenly realizing, it's like, wow, I can go anywhere I want to, anytime I want to. You always could, baby. But you're not ready till you're ready, and then suddenly you're ready, and then there you go. If you try to do it earlier, you probably have some kind of traumatic experience, make things worse. Fire Waco says, prediction, James Cameron will be wearing a dress within 5 years. I just despise his politics so much, but like Tom Cruise, I gotta, first, my favorite movie, that doesn't matter in terms of his personality, but Cameron did go to the deepest part of the ocean. He actually built this thing with his own money and did that dive. And once he did that, I just said to myself, well, no matter what I think about the guy, you can't say he doesn't have guts, and a fair amount of brains too. That's about the most difficult thing you have to do. I was thinking about this, by the way. So at the implosion point of the Titan, anybody's arguing between 360, let's say 400 atmospheres of pressure. So people are saying, well, carbon fiber works for aircraft and stuff. Why doesn't it work for submarines? I don't know if anybody's completely aware of this, but when you are in space, you have at most 1 atmosphere inside the capsule, and in American space flight, it's much less than an atmosphere. It's pure oxygen. But let's just say you're in a Russian capsule. You've got 1 atmosphere on the inside. You've got 0 atmospheres on the outside. The pressure differential is 1 atmosphere, 0 to 1. The pressure differential on Titan was 400 to 1. Flying in space is infinitely safer, I would say, than going to the bottom of the ocean. Much safer. For one thing, if you have a hull rupture and you're wearing a suit, you at least have a chance. The spacesuit is just a spaceship inside a spaceship. And so if it turned out that the slightest, defect or crack in the hull caused a spacecraft to just explode like that, but it doesn't. So in any event, there you go. All right, so here we go. We're going to do our questions like we said we would, like good little campers. And let's see what we had. Hey. As usual, once again, thank you to Henry Lumley and Marusha and Eric and GK and everybody else who's helped to constantly moderate this thing, so that I don't have to. It's been really wonderful. Thank you. All right, so let's see what we got here. We got ourselves an Eric Blake. 3 paragraphs. I'm just trying to get a sense of how far ahead we got to go look here. You know what? I think we could probably get through these, actually. I think we'll get through them, and then we will put up the test pattern and sign off, because I'm hungry. All right, here we go. First question is from Mr. Eric Blake. The man in the hat is back. Standard Star Trek salutation. So I've been thinking about the various elements of both sides of the Trump or DeSantis argument. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. So I've been thinking about the various elements both sides of the Trump or DeSantis argument could do or point out regarding which one has a better shot at beating Biden. To be blunt, I'm of the impression that my proverbial shoe could beat Biden, but regardless, the shoe won 81 million votes. That's quite a lot of votes for a shoe. In fact, I find that remarkable and unlikely. Now, one of the most brilliant things that Trump did for his 2016 campaign was to have many of the female victims of Bill show up for the debate with Hillary. Yes, that cut the "I'm a woman" argument right off at the knees. Along the same lines, imagine, if you will, for the Trump-Biden debate, that's assuming he debates, which is, I think, at this point unlikely. I think he'll gather his robes around him and say, I'm not going to lower the office of the presidency by having a debate with a man who tried to, overtake the Capitol by force, something along those lines. Mark my words. He similarly invites at least the 3 female victims of Joe, one, of course, being assault victim Tara Reid, and the other 2 being Joe's abandoned and forgotten granddaughter and her mother. Yeah, that whole thing is disgraceful. Would be a brilliant move, powerfully reminding everyone of just how false Brandon's image as America's charming, cranky grandpa is. Well, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. And to be blunt, I don't see any other candidate in the GOP having that sort of chutzpah. What say you? I'll just be perfectly honest with you. I am surprised that Trump did not destroy Biden in the 2020 debates. I mean, just shred him, because he didn't. Um, and and I think, given what happened in 2020, certainly my sense of comedy, not comedy, both of them are refined enough so that I'm not gonna be nice to this guy. I think I'd probably do something like, "Hey Joe, here just the beginning of the evening, just real quick. Uh, Here's a number 618 618. Got it? Okay, we'll check back at the end of the debate. 618. Got it? 618. Okay, don't write it down. It's not fair. 618. Okay, got it. Anyway, something along those lines. Or you could ask him what day it is, or the year even. Uh, so, in terms of how you go after Biden, we already know how Trump's going to go after Biden in the debates if it ever gets to that point, because he's already gone after Biden. He's basically saying it's a crime family. He's saying the guy's mentally not there. He's basically debating him, and has been since the 2020 election, and doing a pretty good job of savaging him. And the tech companies and the media doing a pretty good job of keeping that quiet. So I think whoever the Republican nominee is, and assuming the Democratic nominee is Biden, because Steve's episode from last week or 2 weeks ago, Biden is definitely in and Biden is definitely out. I think that right angle has got a lot to say for it. But assuming it is Joe Biden, then if he declines to debate, then I would be howling constantly that he will not debate because he's not mentally capable of debating. I would, and Trump will do that, no doubt. I would simply just scream it from the balconies every single time I'm on camera. Why will Joe Biden not come out and debate? I could ask you what he's afraid of, but my contention is he doesn't know what he's afraid of. He doesn't know much about anything anymore. And this question can be solved relatively easily. 3 debates, as every other modern presidential election has done. And the fact that he's not going to debate me is an indication that what you know and I know and everybody knows, he knows. Because he's constantly saying, excuse me, sorry. Anyway, that kind of thing. So, the question isn't what will Biden do in an emergency. The question is, if I was Trump or whoever, the question is not how will Biden handle a crisis. The question is, who is going to be handling the crisis? Who was the president of the United States for the last 3 years? Who was making these decisions? Scott's convinced that he's not suffering that kind of mental impairment. I do not know how you come to that conclusion, but I respect Scott and I respect his opinion and I like him, and I always need to hear opposing viewpoints. But honestly, there's been so many times where it's on a daily basis. He's just staring off into space, and I don't know. I think if it were me, my strategy would be to basically say, why aren't we concerned about the fact that we don't know who the president of the United States is? And needless to say, I not only hope he gets elected, pray he gets elected, but if he does, there's a lot of things I'd do right away. I'd break up the tech companies, and I think even before then, just for the sake of it, just to have it, just the sheer satisfaction of it, I think I'd certainly fire every 3 and 4 star flag officer in the armed forces, and I might go all the way down to the colonels. When you have a guy who's an Air Force officer saying we got to stop hiring white pilots, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying essentially the same thing. We have too many white officers. We have to cashier 40,000 officers who are experienced, hardened war fighters, because our armed forces don't match the demographics of the country. They don't match the demographics of the country because the military is self-selected for achievers. and I would just go in there and clean it out. And and you hear the chairman of the Joint Chiefs saying, "Well, he was being questioned on this. Well, why would you have to fire all these white officers? Well, because we want our armed forces to look like the country." So the representative says, um, so that means like 2% Pacific Islander and all the rest. Yes, that's basically what he said. And I'm thinking, okay, well, if that's the way it has to be done, then when can we start integrating the NBA? And everybody's made that argument, but as I was getting out of the car last night, I thought, it's not just a question, by the way, of the NBA being overrepresented by black players. The NBA doesn't look like America, and we have to do something about that. It doesn't look like America. We have to do something about it. But if we were to go in there and make the NBA the same demographically as the United States, as the country is, which is the entire argument about fairness, I realized it's not just a question of your skin color. You would also have to have representation from people who are below average height. You'd have to have certain players who are well below average height. You couldn't discriminate on the basis of age. If you wanted to make it look like America, you've got to have at least a couple people in their 80s on the team, and people who are 4 or 5, old enough to walk or crawl. They got to be on there too. And let's not forget body weight and all of it. And why our side is incapable of making these arguments that just show how ridiculous this entire thing is. Forget about the color of people's skin in the NBA. Where's the equity and inclusion for weight, body weight, body mass? Where's the inclusion for age? Where's the inclusion for height? It seems extraordinarily unfair and unjust to me to limit this to tall, young, healthy males. It seems like part of the patriarchy at work. It seems like that needs to be dismantled. It's problematic. That's the problem. You see, the NBA is problematic, and again and again and again, we find out that with very few exceptions, Republicans, not so much conservatives, Republicans don't know how to do this. They just don't know how. Thank you, KissMa001 does a little super chat there saying, just 6 words, doesn't he look a bit tired? I don't know if you're talking about Joe or me, but in any event, I'm sure both of us could use a nap.
It's a Doctor Who reference.
Oh, okay. The Siri has spoken. Okay, so let's move on here. Chris Taylor. The Supreme Court has ruled against Harvard in Students for Fair Admissions, Inc. versus President and Fellows of Harvard College. Yes. So it's a great day for Caucasians and Orientals that the government has told Harvard it can no longer consider a student's race when considering them for admission. There's more to this question. I'm just going to answer this. It's a great day for the idea that individuals should be judged on the basis of their individual lights and talents rather than what color they are, what height they are, what religion they are, what their nationality is. It's not a victory for Caucasians or Orientals. It's as much a victory for black, probably more of a victory for black people in America than it is for white or Asian people. It's not a question of now, eventually, if this sticks, you won't have to carry that on your shoulders. I know a number of extraordinarily competent black people who not constantly, every now and then will say, yeah, everybody who graduates from that college gets the respect due, but now we have to be, people have to wonder whether or not we got in with lower grades or got out with lower grades. It's just plain wrong. So is it a good day for whites and Caucasians? Yes. Caucasians and Orientals. Oriental, I find that term problematic, Chris. Yes, it's a good day for them. It's also a good day for blacks, Hispanics. Run down the list of tribes that they continually try to divide us into. To continue the question, or is it a terrible day for individualists of all races that the court has ruled that we private individuals have no freedom of association but rather that the federal government can tell us who we must, mustn't, can, and can't admit, reject, hire, fire, join, or expel, and what opinions of ours on these matters our rulers deem valid or invalid to base decisions on. I'm conflicted. If we've given up as a society on freedom of association, then obviously I think people should be forced to associate the way I like, race neutral instead of the fashion of the collectivists slanted against me and mine. But it feels like we've just decided what we are, and now we're trying to negotiate a favorable price. So that line, for those of you not familiar with it, is I don't know, was attributed to, it's probably Noel Coward, but he was having some kind of discussion with this woman, and he asked her, "Would you sleep with me for 10,000 pounds?" And she said, "Well, yes, I think so." She said, "Well, what about 10 pounds?" He said, "Well, what kind of girl do you think I am?" And he said, "Well, we already know what kind of girl you are. We're just trying to settle on a price." So Harvard, if Harvard was a completely private institution, I would say it's Harvard's business to do whatever they want to. But I'm pretty sure Harvard gets a significant amount of federal money. And I know they're getting a lot of federal money now that the federal government's taken over the student loan program. So it is no longer a question of this being private property. Because if it is private property, they got a right to do, I'm with you on this one, Chris. If I want to open a restaurant that doesn't serve white conservatives, that's my business, that's my right. I don't like it, so I'll go someplace else. But I'm not going to hyperventilate about it, and I'm not going to lose sleep about it, and I'm not going to protest it either. I don't care. I'll just go someplace else. This kind of comes back to the dwarf thing that we started with. You know, it's like, what's wrong with being a dwarf? Why is it that the person who's not a dwarf says that this is something to be ashamed of when the guy who is a dwarf said, "That's what I am"? So I suppose that that all of this eventually comes down to personal insecurity on the part of the left, and just, I got to go make somebody else's life miserable. But they're not private property in the in the genuine sense of the word. I guess they're kind of a hybrid that lives in between these things. And I think the point is, if you'll pardon the expression, academic anyway, because at this point, I no longer have any, not only do I not have any respect for anybody who attended an Ivy League college, I have contempt for somebody who did that. I think if I was hiring somebody and they told me I was a Harvard graduate, I'd said, "Next, anybody out there went to community college or anything? Anybody knows anything about the real world?" Because now, Harvard used to mean this is the best in the world. Now Harvard means this is the most entitled in the world, and I'm just not. I'm not impressed, and I think, and as one of the things that I used to talk about a lot more than I do now, but one of the reasons there's so much turmoil right now is because not just the political stuff, it's also because we are in this period where the entire human society is transferring from a second age industrial economy into a third age electronic economy. And that is the same kind of fundamental shift as it was when industry came along and people moved off the farms into the cities. People are moving back out of the cities because they can work from anywhere in an information age society. And so I just think the whole idea of these brick and mortar universities are going the way of the Edsel, which is a shame, because you can actually learn a lot at an actual university, and it's really a lot of fun too. But they've destroyed themselves. It's not that I feel sorry for them. I just can't even imagine. I haven't been back to the University of Florida since '98, I think. I keep thinking, I should go back and just watch a game or something, but then something just kind of grabs me. You probably don't want to go back you don't want to see it now. I don't think you really do. I'm sure there's somebody out there protesting that Albert the alligator is problematic because it's exploiting non-human species, or degrading them and causing real alligators out in the Everglades to suffer anxiety attacks and cry their crocodile tears. Everything you touch, you destroy, you progressives, and so they're trying to touch everything. That doesn't mean that everything is destroyed. It just means that things change. If Harvard becomes well, it's not if. Harvard is now, in my opinion, a laughing stock and a liability. If somebody told me that didn't, what's her name, who destroyed the number one brand in the country, beer brand, didn't that genius go to Harvard? Wasn't she a Harvard grad? The one whose name I can never remember, who thought it'd be a good idea to do the Dylan Mulvaney thing? That's a Harvard education at work now, isn't it? She was a Harvard business grad, I want to say, right? That's how I look at them, and I think that's how most people look at them now. It's just, okay, so you went to one of these universities that taught you to hate your clients, and no matter what your clients are, and divide your clients up and play to half of the clients, and so congratulations. Now, if I wanted a business to be a big success, I'd hire a Harvard Business School grad. Now, if I want to destroy a company, I'll hire a Harvard Business School grad. And Woody Fool says, see, also Mike Rowe works. Mike Rowe is ahead of this, way ahead of this wave. Mike was talking about this 15 years ago. And he's right. Not only do we need people who work with their hands and do not need a college education, they need technical education, which is often an apprenticeship. Those people are just better. They're better off. They're making 80 grand a year right out of college. They don't have $200,000 worth of debt to pay off. One of the people that was talking about this student debt thing is it just completely affects the housing market. People used to graduate from college, get married, buy a house. Now they graduate from college, don't get married, and they've got $200,000 in debt. They can't buy anything. But, fool around and find out, right? I do like that expression better in its fully authentic idiom, but nevertheless, you get the idea. So anyway, I think Harvard's over, and I think all colleges are over, and that's a shame because colleges were fun. I'm beginning to think more and more that those of us listening, and especially people around my age, are just somehow managed to live in this incredible golden age. Everybody looks back on their own youth that way. I'm sure there were flinty Israelites, sergeants, walking through the ranks talking about, oh, you guys would blow your horns, blow down the walls of Jericho. Oh, we used to use stone axes to do that, you and your newfangled technology. So that's just part of human nature, but I just think things got better and better and better, and then right around the time that I started growing up, they started getting worse and worse and worse. I know for a certain fact that I was lucky enough to be born on the cusp of so many things. When we first were doing a planetarium show about Mars, let's say, we'd have the best photograph taken from Earth's best telescope, which wasn't that great. And then we got to see Mariner 9 come in. I mean, I got to see that. And oh my God, look at that. You can see craters and stuff. And there's mountains and volcanoes. And it just got better and better. Same for Jupiter, same for the outer planets, same for Pluto recently. Then the Hubble, and now the James Webb. All these things that were unknown to me growing up are now becoming known to me. And every time that happens, I get to have a little dopamine hit. Like, oh, wow, that's cool. Look at that. We figured that out. Anybody prior to my general birthday had the question but never got the answer, and everybody after it will have the answer and never happened to ask the question of what did that look like. Same thing's true for computer games and computers in general. I remember seeing the first computer. I remember so clearly remember where I was and who I was calling when I first got an automated voice answering machine. That was like, call everybody you know and have them call this number so they can hear this thing. I clearly remember the first time I ever used an ATM. It was in Miami, and it was called 24-Hour Jack. I forget the name of the bank. I want to say Sun Bank, but 24-Hour Jack I remember. And it was what? Yeah, you just drive up. You mean like to a tube thing? No, anytime, day or night. Really? Yeah, you just walk up and get the money. It's a miracle. I know there's a lot of okay boomers about that, but it doesn't matter what you have to say about it. The fact remains, we got to see the wonders and the miracles happen. And by the way, we also the boomers are the ones that had to do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of pollution and racism, because millennials and Gen Z have grown up not getting really any racism into them in any way. And my parents and grandparents were of a time when that kind of thing was a lot more common. And the boomers are the generation that had to change our minds. We're the ones that had to. We watched All in the Family, and we watched all of these things. I remember thinking about this not too long ago. There was a made-for-TV movie that came out. I want to say be right around 1970, maybe early 70s, something like that. And it was called, I think it was called That Certain Summer, and it was starring Hal Holbrook, and I think everybody was kind of like, you need to see this, and it was shocking. It was shocking, because this movie was about a guy visiting his father who's gotten divorced, and then you find out the father is gay, and that was just like knock the wind out of you. My God, really? Yeah. I don't know if that was the first time ever on TV, but I know it was among the first. I remember on Soap when Billy Crystal was playing Jody. Openly gay character was just like, whoa. And the way they treated him was wonderful. His older brother and we reprogrammed ourselves, and it was it wasn't so much hard or even difficult or painful. It's just changing your mind, and not even changing your mind, just seeing things in a different way. I mentioned All in the Family. Maude, I remember my father would just, when he would just if he'd had an axe and a TV in the room at the same time that Maude was on, then there would have been a lot of broken glass on the floor. He just despised that woman and despised the show. And I look at it and I watch it then, and occasionally I'll dip back in and see it. It's like, it's just a giant screech. But, we had to, we did have to. There's nothing else to watch. So, anyway, about that. Okay, so moving on. Eli Noor. Hypothetically, if the Soviets had beat us to the moon, what would have been our response? Would we have called it quits like the Soviets essentially did, or would we have set a new goal even further to compete with them, similar to how we set the moon landing goal after the Soviets beat us to space, into orbit? Considering that 20th century Americans did not give up easily, in my opinion, is the latter. Interested to hear your thoughts. You don't put the effort and time. Everybody thinks it's the Apollo program, and that was 400,000 people, but it wasn't just the Apollo program. It was the Gemini program, the Mercury program, was all the sounding rockets, everything. It's kind of like saying if you're in the Indy 500 or something, and the guy wins and he's 2 laps ahead of you or whatever the case may be, do you just stop? No, you finish the race. We certainly would have finished the race. There's no question we would have finished the race in my mind. I'm just actually playing the percentages in terms of what was the chance that the Soviets ever could have beaten us to the moon. And I think I know a fair bit about this, looking at all of the variables. I think the chance of them beating us to the moon was pretty nearly zero. It's certainly theoretically possible, but there's a lot of things in there that people don't take into account. I'll give you a great example. When the first human spacewalk was Leonov, cosmonaut, Soviet cosmonaut, and he got out of essentially a Vostok capsule, and in order for him to do the spacewalk, the capsule had an inflatable airlock. It's like just a tube, like a canvas tube. And they would basically extend the tube, open the inner hatch. Now there'd be air in the tube and in the capsule. Leonov would get into the tube. It's all weightless, obviously. Then they'd close the hatch to the capsule. Then he'd open the hatch to space. Then he'd go outside, do his moonwalk, and then he'd do the reverse. It's an airlock. It's just all it is. It's an airlock. Now, as it turned out, Leonov got a little mixed up out there. A lot of guys got mixed up before Buzz Aldrin figured out you could train underwater. There were Gemini astronauts who were completely disoriented, on the outside of the spacecraft. And Buzz was a scuba diver, and he said, we could practice this a lot in 0G. Well, how do you do that? Well, buoyancy, baby. But Leonov was out on this spacewalk, and he went back in. He did the natural thing. He went in head first, but he wasn't supposed to go head first. He was supposed to come back feet first the way he came out. So he got inside this thing, and during the time that he was outside of the vehicle, because he's looking at a closed hatch in front of him, the pressure had gone down, so the tube was getting smaller, and he finds himself caught in there like one of those Chinese finger trap kind of things. And he damn near died of heat exhaustion, among other things. He said that when he got back to the ground after they'd landed and they stood him up, and there was finally gravity again, he said that there was sweat up to his knees. That he had sweat so much over his body that the sweat contained inside his suit was up to his knees. I believe it. So that's how the Soviets did their spacewalk. When the Americans did the spacewalk, we had the Gemini capsule, which had two enormous hatchback doors, just huge doors, just sitting right there. These two doors open, and you just undo the buckles, and out you go. So why didn't the Russians do that? Well, this is one of the things I learned doing the Apollo 11 thing. The Russians couldn't do that. They were not able to depressurize their capsules. And the reason they couldn't depressurize their capsules was because all of their electronics were tube-based electronics, and tubes get hot. And if there's no air to cool the tubes, then they'll burn out. American capsules were using transistors by this time. But that's just one little tiny example of it. I was completely stunned when I heard that was the reason, but that was the reason. They could not allow the inside of that Soviet capsule to be in a vacuum, because a vacuum is very, very good at stopping heat from being radiated. And so there we go. So the Soviets got a big head start on us. The short form of the space race is, after World War II, the Russians got the actual hardware, and we got the scientists. So that gave them a pretty big lead. They weren't able to design atomic weapons or guidance systems with let me rephrase that. They weren't able to develop guidance systems that were as accurate as ours were. So if you can't place a nuclear weapon as accurately as your opponent, then you have essentially one path to go, and that is make a bomb that's so big that it doesn't matter if you're off by 5 miles or 10 or whatever the case may be. So they built these huge thermonuclear weapons, and they're very, very heavy compared to ours, and that means you have to have a big honking rocket to fly the thing, and so that's basically how that whole thing went. So when you realize that they were, at least in the early days of the space race, the Soviets weren't even using transistors, you realize that it was never really as close as it seemed. I gotta hand it to them. I really have nothing but respect for the courage of the cosmonauts, and not so much respect for the design bureau, and certainly no respect for the government that basically thought they could trade lives for firsts in their nuclear reactors as well as their space race and all the rest of it. But the Soviet lunar lander is a one-man lander instead of a two-man lander. It's about 2/3 the size of the LEM, and it's kind of a cute-looking little thing. It's actually pretty cool. It's a little sphere. They like their spheres. Spheres make sense, I guess. But is one guy going down, and I thought, oh, isn't that cute? It's really what it looked like. It looked like a little puppy lander. Like, oh, this is gonna be a nice lander when it grows up one day. But they were ready to go in that. But when you see the inside of that lander, it's like being inside a boiler. It's just nothing but metal and cables that are attached to the inside somehow. And a couple of instruments, but basically you're just inside this big metal sphere, and and you look at the inside of the LEM, which was cramped, but the LEM was, it's filled with instrumentation, circuit breakers, all kinds of things there, and you got two guys standing there, and they're both, one guy's calling out the descent data, and the other guy's flying the damn thing, on the anniversary today. So if you listen to, and I will put the link up to this thing that's done. I told you about this guy Hayes Grayart who did every single step of the Apollo 11 moonwalk. He also did the landing in real time from far away, and you can just see this LEM is just a speck. It's just a speck, and then when it's time to lift off, it's half a speck. And when you see it from a distance, you realize just the audacity of it, just the raw audacity of it, the guts. The Armstrong thought that the Apollo 11 had a 50-50 chance of mission success, not 50-50 chance of coming back, but a 50-50 chance of mission success. And it's fun to listen to, at least fun for me, to listen to the 6 landings starting at PDA, which is the beginning of the powered descent phase. That's when they start the main lander, the main descent engine, and they're just going down to land on the moon. And every time you listen to it, you realize that this is a two-man job. It really was a two-man job. And Apollo 11, I think, clearly was the hairiest one of all by a large margin. I mean, Apollo 11 landed with 16 seconds worth of fuel in the tanks, and they had a hard abort at 60 seconds of fuel. That's it, Neil. 60 seconds. You get below 60 seconds, you're getting out of there. He said, no, I don't think so. And you think to yourself, wow, amazing. If Neil Armstrong had only been in the air another quarter of a minute longer, they would have crashed. And then I thought about that for a while. I said, 16 seconds, man, he was cutting it so close. 13 seconds, says Sad Wings Raging. Okay, either one. I'll say 15 just for the sake of it. And you say to yourself, my God, he came within 15 seconds of crashing this thing. And I'm looking at this landing animation, I realized, no. Neil could have put that thing down easily 30 seconds earlier, and probably a minute earlier. He knew how much fuel he had left, and he finessed the landing. He just finessed it. He's just in a hover over the surface at 20 feet for, I don't know, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, something like that. He's just plain looking to get this thing down, and when you look at the animation, you realize it just greaser. He just greased it. It's just like, ooh, dust coming. And it's like, yeah, okay, Neil. Yeah, whatever. How much we got left, Buzz? Yeah, about 13 seconds, Neil. Yeah, it could maybe sort of smooth. Yeah, that's enough. Take contact light, shut off the engine. So, yes, it was close, but it wouldn't have been that close because Armstrong would have gotten the thing down. Armstrong would have landed that LEM with enough fuel to safely land the LEM, no matter where or what the circumstances were. I have no doubt of it whatsoever. And furthermore, I think that Armstrong would have used almost all the fuel available to him because he could. That's a luxury. That's finesse. What a guy. But again, it's a two-man job. So back to the Soviets have beaten us there. Listen to the powered descent phases. I want to say it's about 9 minutes long, something in that general vicinity. And just listen, and you'll on the Apollo 11, and it's on all the Apollo landings, but on Apollo 11, Neil doesn't say anything except give us an answer on the 1202, the unknown error code that they never had before. So the whole landing is nothing but Aldrin talking. Aldrin is talking nonstop, and it's punctuated by which is Armstrong running the reaction control system, he's not saying a word. He's looking out the window. And Buzz is looking at the instruments. And this is how we land commercial airliners to this day in instrument conditions. When you're about to land a commercial jet in instrument conditions, let's say it's low ceiling at nighttime, thick clouds, you have one pilot who is flying the instruments. He's not looking out the window. He is flying the instruments. He's making sure that the instrument approach is correct, and he's not taking his eyes off of the instruments. The other pilot is looking out the window, and he's waiting for visual identification of the runway. When he sees the runway and he's got a good visual reference on the runway, he takes over. Because going from this to this and then back to this again is, you know, it's not just double your workload, it's probably squares your workload. And so just as a matter of safety and common sense, when we do any of the landings you've ever done ever in a jet aircraft have been done, when it's in instrument conditions, been done by two pilots. One guy's flying the instruments, the other guy's looking out the window, flying the airplane. The instrument guy's flying the airplane until visual contact is made, and then the visual pilot flies the landing. Because once you look up, it takes a while for you to get reoriented. And it's just a good system. And so the Soviets never had any plans to do a two-person lander. And even if they'd gotten the thing off the pad and gotten it to the moon, I just don't see how they could have survived that. Unlimited Hornet Works asks the interesting question: how do single-seat aircraft do this? We do it very carefully. And the main reason that mostly reason that single-seat aircraft can do this by single pilot is because we're generally flying a lot slower than they are. And we also aren't carrying all of those people. So I don't know how many, that'd be an interesting statistic to have. It's no way to obtain it, but it'd be interesting to know how many private aircraft fatalities would have been prevented if there'd been two pilots there. And I'm going to go off of my 1,000 hours of experience with an instrument rating, and out of the air, I'm going to pull a number, and that number is going to be, I think, 85% of the total number of accidents, the fatal accidents, could have been avoided by having another pilot, for no other reason than the extraordinarily useful flying axiom, and that is that anytime you're flying with another pilot, the pilot who's the most chicken wins. That's a good way to stay alive. All right, so anyway, vacuum tubes, the one-person descent, you know, Neil Armstrong, the most capable, well-trained guy in the world, thought the chances were 50-50, and he had one of the most well-trained guys in the world. In fact, Buzz was the absolute master of orbital mechanics. If you wanted one guy next to you who's going to be your trajectory guy in real time, then Buzz was the guy. I just don't see how they could have done the landing and succeeded. It's possible. I just think it's extremely unlikely. I think the chance of them. I think it's more likely than. How do I want to put this? I think the chance of them landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth is essentially nil in terms of beating America at it. But the chance of them putting a Soviet cosmonaut into the moon, I think we're probably approaching maybe 10 or 20%. I just don't think they would have survived I just don't see how they could have done it. I just watched how difficult it was for our guys, and we had the benefit of two guys, better gear, much more training and much better training. So there you go. By the way, the flying bedstead, which is this spidery-legged thing that had a pivoting jet engine and a controls off to the side. It looked like a homemade helicopter, basically. And this was designed to give the lunar module pilots a sense of, you know, when you're hovering that thing, it's like trying to stand on the top of a beach ball. You don't want to go over, you know, it's not dynamically stable. And Neil ejected from one of these trainers, they say about about 3/10 of a second later, he probably wouldn't have made it. He just barely got out. But he also said that he didn't think that they could have accomplished the landing without that flying bedstead thing. That it was just just what Nick Ignacio says. Bill, no one stood on the moon. I'm sorry. Are you saying it didn't happen, Nick? Because I'm actually hoping that's what you're saying in the YouTube thing. Because not that I'm going to go off on this. I'm just curious to know. Because this is a conversation I've always wanted to have. So the thing I'm curious about, Nick, is if the moon landing didn't happen, forget about all the evidence about that. I'm serious about this. If the moon landing was fake, how far does the fake go? In other words, were the Mercury missions, the suborbital and the orbital missions, were they fakes? Were the two-person docking in space missions fakes? Were the space shuttle missions fakes? And if you're saying no, they weren't, then you're saying that the problem was leaving Earth orbit. Well, first of all, 98% of the total energy needed to get you to the moon is needed to get you into Earth orbit. Hi, we're good, thanks.
Okay, good.
Thanks. So Nick Ignacio says it's what I'm assuming. I don't trust anything I've heard or seen through screens. Well, I didn't see it through screens. I saw it with my own eyes. I saw Apollo 13 lift off from Cape Kennedy, and me and 7 million other people. I love how people say, well, they couldn't have survived the Van Allen belts, the radiation. Wow, it's quite a thing to say. What would the dose have been? Well, what do you mean? Well, how much radiation would they have taken if they'd flown through the Van Allen belts? You say it's impossible to survive it, so what was the radiation dose? And what is the fatal dose? And most people can't answer either one of those questions. If you can't tell me what the dose was, if you can't tell me how radioactive the Van Allen belts are, but you can tell me that it was not survivable, I find that to be a little odd. In any event, where does the fake begin? Most people who don't think the moon landing happened say that, oh, they went into Earth orbit, but they never actually went to the moon or ever landed on the moon. We've been talking about the Soviet space race and so on. The Soviet Union did have radar as well as we did, and I kind of think that if it turned out that while TV cameras all over the world are saying, wow, look at that, Neil Armstrong was walking on the moon, and they've got a radar return of Apollo 11 in Earth orbit, I think they would have said something about that. I also find it odd that if that was the case and they knew it, why they sent a letter of congratulations to America about our big space victory and our tremendous achievement. I just find all of this to be interesting. What I find to be more interesting and more alarming, frankly, because I'm feeling this myself, is this sense of nobody believes anything anymore. Nobody believes the government. If the government says it, it's not a question of, geez, do I believe it? If the government says it, then it's a lie. That's where we are now for a lot of people. And that's a dangerous place to be. I was trying to talk about that earlier with the Ocean's Gate thing. You don't want to get to that place where you're so mentally rigid. We are at the place now where people, and I'm one of them, who just despise Joe Biden and everything he stands for, how he got there, who he is, what he's done, the bribery, the treason, the dementia, the senility, the cheating, the destruction of the military, all of it. I can't stand him. I can't stand him. And at the same time, if Joe Biden steps out and it's raining, and Joe Biden says, hey, it's raining, there are people who say, no, it's not. You know what I mean? You can't go that way. It's not good for you. It's not healthy. You have to be able to say, I think it's healthy to be skeptical of your government. I'm a lot more skeptical now than I was in 2019. much more skeptical now, much more. And this lack of skepticism on the part of people like me that got us into this trouble in the first place. But nevertheless, that doesn't mean they're automatically wrong. It just means that they've done some lying in the past, and now you have to see if they're lying now. I think I'm not going to get into the whole moon landing thing yet. In any event, it's moon landing day, and the evidence is overwhelming that we went, and I don't know when the hoax began. That's what I'm trying to say, and when it ended either, because apparently SpaceX is going up into space. So somewhere along the line, and by the way, if you look for LRO images, Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, I'm saying this as a friend, Nick. Just go online and look for LRO images of the Apollo landing sites. We have a extraordinarily useful satellite in orbit around the moon for years now. I think it's decades, almost more than a decade, called the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, and it takes high-resolution photographs of the moon. And it overflew the Apollo sites and was able to show like a pixel speck where the LEMs, the lower stages of the LEMs were on all the Apollo missions. But nevertheless, it wasn't. They were right exactly where they're supposed to be, but people could tell it's a rock. So they changed the orbit of the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. They changed its orbit and made its closest approach to the moon much closer, about half the distance. And then they imaged all 6 Apollo sites. And now the resolution of those images show the LEM is clearly there. The 4 legs and the feet pad are clearly there. The flag is where it's supposed to be on each mission. The footsteps are visible. The tracks of the rover are clearly visible. Everything's right where it's supposed to be. If you shoot a laser beam at the moon, it comes reflected back at 7 places. 6 places where we landed, and 1 place where the Soviets landed. And it just seems overwhelming to me. But you do you, and I'll do me. Okay, so back to this question here. Okay, next. So we got Joe Roth, we got Jacob Belchek, we got Jim Samples, we got Steve Young, we got Marisha Dark, and that's it. Okay, moving on. Joe Roth says, I'll keep this brief. What the hell is taking so long for the Republicans in the House to impeach somebody? It's July and nothing is happening. Are they waiting for the stars to line up perfectly, or are they just slow walking with no intention of holding Biden or his minions accountable? I want less talk and more action. Okay, fine, these investigations are good and they should continue the investigations, but for heaven's sake, impeach now, ask questions later. Republicans always do this, and then nothing happens. Do you think Republicans just don't have the votes in the House to impeach Biden, Garland, etc.? Well, I'm sure we have the votes. You can always count on a handful of Republicans to vote with the Democrats. I predict nothing will happen with this Congress and no one is held accountable. I want jail time for these mofos. Stop stalling and just do it. What say you? I couldn't agree more. I want jail time for these mofos too. I want jail time for them. All of them. The FBI guys, the CIA guys, the IRS people that got corrupted, the Biden crime family, the Clinton crime family, Strzok, Comey. I consider these guys to be traitors by the classical definition of what a traitor is. And I'd like to see all of them in jail as a minimum. But, and this is not a but in terms of this is why we shouldn't do it. I think this is why it's not being done. The genius of what they've done to this country is I used to think, okay, they take over the media, so nobody breaks any bad news. You're never going to hear news about the crimes that they've committed. Well, it turns out that you do hear news about the crimes that they've committed. The thing that they've done that I didn't see coming was that they were able to control the Department of Justice. If you control the Department of Justice, you control the FBI. If you control the Department of Justice, you have the Attorney General of the United States, who basically has prosecutorial discretion. And once you have the Department of Justice, and on state level as well, then Joe Biden could walk into the middle of a Super Bowl game televised around the world and fire bazooka rounds into the crowd, kill 10,000 people. And if the Attorney General of the United States decides not to prosecute the case, then all that's going to happen is a number of harshly worded letters and emails will be written. I suspect that the reason it hasn't happened yet is because I suspect that, look, it's academic at this point. It's not going to get past the Senate, and I think that the evidence against Biden is so overwhelming that they're waiting until they can get a conviction. Although I'll tell you, and you can't really do it twice, right? You can't impeach the guy for the same thing twice. So I suspect that they've got their best case, and I've seen a lot of Republican congressmen. Let me rephrase that. I've seen 5 or 6 of them over a long period of time, and RFK Jr. as well, and a couple others, who are asking some very pointed questions and being basically told to, pound sand. And I think that they're building their case. Now, they could be building their. I remember them building the case about election fraud too, and that didn't come to anything. So you have to be able to. I know it's not up to the Justice Department in the case of an impeachment vote, which is encouraging, but while it would be extremely satisfying to have the just the revenge of it, put an asterisk next to Biden's name. Once they did what they did to Trump, it was clear that every president of the United States is going to be impeached, or at least articles of impeachment will be drawn up. Everyone from now on is going to be impeached. That's just how low things have gotten. But my point is, once you've brought charges, if it turns out that it doesn't clear the Senate, then you really can't bring those charges again. And I suspect that what's happening, and the reason you haven't seen this impeachment moving yet, is because they are getting all their ducks in line and waiting to the point where they can actually do something. Because if you're gonna, you just don't want to blow the shot on this. The 2022 midterms really shook me up. And it makes you wonder, what's it going to take? A large number of people didn't show up because Donald Trump wasn't running. They'll show up in 2024. I think it's dangerous to put the future of the country in any individual's hands, regardless of who that person is. People are responsible. No one's going to come riding to save the country, except for us. So it's a do-it-yourself job, and you got to do the work and get your hands dirty and all the rest of it. And if you're not willing to do that, then off it goes. So that would be my explanation for it. Although I know the frustration, and I'm sick and tired of watching people who are obviously guilty, clearly guilty, overwhelmingly guilty beyond a shadow of a doubt, forget reasonable doubt, beyond any shadow of a doubt, guilty, not only going free, but telling the rest of us what to do and telling us when we can go outside and where we can eat and all the rest of it. I'm just sick and tired of it. I'd like to see Gavin Newsom in jail for the rest of his life, and I'd like to see Gavin Newsom with a prison haircut, not an $800 haircut. I'd find that to be extremely satisfying. But one totalitarian dictator at a time. Jacob Belchek. Hey, there's a name we like very much. Hey, Jacob. Hey, Bill. Hail, Bill, which is more appropriate, obviously. I recently came across a psychological experiment that correlates political affiliation to the magnitude of the disgust response of the human brain. Yes. It was so reliable that researchers claimed to be able to determine political leaning based on the brain response to a single image. Links for the studies are here in case you're interested, and here are some links. Stripped down version is, us righties have a stronger disgust response to things that would be traditionally considered disgusting, rotting food, dead animals, etc., than the lefties do. And it shows up in brain response. I suspect that this contributes greatly to things like body positivity movement, as well as the left's general perception of beautiful men in woman face. How much of this is a question of biology and how much a question of sociological conditioning? I think this helps explain why rights and left see the world so differently. What are your thoughts? Yeah, 100% agree. When you see one of these gay pride parades, and you see the participants. I'm not talking about gay people, I'm talking about the people in a gay pride parade. When you see how far they are going in order to provoke that kind of, disgust reaction among the normies, and there's no question that's the case. There's just no question about it. It is intentionally provoking. I've been to 4 or 5 of them. I was the Grand Master of one. That was a high point in my life, actually. No, but I've been to 4 or 5 of them, and a couple in West Hollywood and Fantasy Fest down in Key West, and that is their finger to society, and I've seen things that are just plain revolting, and you're right, they don't see it, and because they don't see it, they constantly assume that we're overreacting. So because their brain is wired differently, they say, what are you guys so upset about? It's just a drag queen with a little 4-year-old on his lap telling him that he'd probably be happy if he tries on a dress backstage and, see how he likes it. What's the problem with you conservatives, you fear and possessed, lunatics? And all of this is an interesting discussion, and it's all theoretical, and it's all he said, she said, except for the wrecking ball of reality, which comes into play when you look at places that are governed by progressives versus places that are governed by conservatives. So I think they're wrong. They think I'm wrong. It's a draw. Who cares? But places that are governed by my set of morals and standards, and yours as well, are far, 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 far happier places for everybody than places that are governed by their standards, because their standards are so low. And if that weren't the case, then we would then it'd just be an academic discussion. If liberal cities were clean and safe and all these things, and they had mass transit that worked, and there were no homeless people, and there was no crime because of the gun control laws, and if all that stuff were true, then you'd say, well, they're just different, just a different way of going at things, I guess, just a different approach. But it's not like that. You've taken the most beautiful city in America, and maybe in the world, in San Francisco, and made it uninhabitable, and the most beautiful state, the most beautiful terrain I've ever seen in my life. They're doing their best to make that uninhabitable as well. When you're trying to decide the difference between right-leaning people and left-leaning people, it's not a question of, that's my cup of tea, that's your cup of tea. It's not. They're not. What I'm trying to say is they're not morally equal points. And I'm not right because I'm saying I'm right. I'm right because of the physical evidence. No one ever got shot climbing over the Berlin Wall to get into East Berlin. No one ever drowned with their entire family around them trying to get to the free health care in Cuba from Fort Lauderdale. Nobody, not one. It is 100% of people fleeing their system of government to come to our system of government. If it was 60-40, that'd be a win for us. But it's not 60-40, it's not 80-20, it's not 90-10, it's not 99-1. It's 100% of people will risk their lives to get away from their philosophy and come to ours, and not one person has ever risked their lives to go from our philosophies to theirs. Because you don't have to risk your life to go from our philosophy. If you don't like it here and you want to go live under socialism, book a flight, man. Have a nice trip. That's not morally equivalent. Those are two morally different and empirically, experimentally provable facts. That life is more enjoyable, happier, more fulfilling under conservative political rule than under liberal political rule. And everybody knows it. And so the question is, what psychological problem do these people have? And this is, this thing explains that old saw, the left thinks that the right is evil and the right just thinks that the left is stupid. We look at them and say, don't you realize what kind of a threat this is? Idiot. And what they're saying is, why are you getting so huffed up about, these gay pride parades, you devil? And if it was just a difference, then it'd be okay. You a Packers fan or a Bears fan? It's there's no. But that's not the outcome here. And and so I do think that the brain wiring is different. The question is, do people who have that certain brain inclination then find their correct political or political philosophy that suits them, or does the political philosophy make them that way? And I'm pretty sure that, obviously I'm sure that the genetic component of this disgust reaction is probably 80% of this. But once you have more than 50% of it being genetic, then you've got liberals going who have a low disgust threshold or none, hanging out with other liberals who also have no disgust threshold, and then the societal aspects of it, the nature versus nurture. Nature puts you in the room, and then nurture reinforces the picture. So they hang out with people who are constantly pushing the limits of what people like us would consider decent or indecent, and now it's both. Now it's both biology and culture. Jim Samples. Hey Bill, have you ever considered that the war in Ukraine is just a bigger distraction? Is just a big distraction for the bigger war both Russia and China are secretly doing in the U.S.? It's an interesting question. So again, the way I deal with these kind of speculative questions or hypotheticals or that kind of thing is to just grant the premise. So let's say that is the case. The Ukraine war was started when one party's tanks crossed a border into the other party's country. And no one's disputing who did the crossing and who did the invading. So the Ukraine war was started by the Russians. I'm not going to get into anything other than the fact that it was started by the Russians. And there's no question about that. No one's denying that. The Russians aren't denying that. So how does Russia benefit from us having our attention riveted on Ukraine? What benefit could they get that would possibly equal not only the destruction of a large part of their military, but the utter destruction of their aura of fearsomeness and ferociousness and essentially military, intimidation? That's gone and it's not coming back. I don't see any gain that Russia would have in terms of its influence over the U.S. In terms of NATO, if the war in Ukraine was a distraction for what they're really doing, then that little distraction has cost them a lot of men, a lot of troops, a lot of money, and it's also cost them things like Sweden and Finland, joining NATO. It's made their situation enormously worse. So I don't think Russia has anything to do with anything, and I don't think the Ukraine war has anything to do with it. Now, China, on the other hand, Russia and China are constantly working to undermine this country. No question about that. The Russians have been doing it since Lenin. Since Lenin, the first thing he did when he seized power in 1917 was scrape up some hard currency to start revolutions in other countries. From the start of the Soviet Union until this exact moment, the Cheka and then the GPU and the NKVD, the KGB, FSB, all of these security agencies have been constantly working to undermine America underground. We try to undermine communist societies in the open. We have things like Voice of America. Here's our argument. We think we're better. They don't do that. They don't get on the air and talk about how they're better because they know they're not. So they have to use subterfuge and lying and deceit and all the rest of it. So Russia has been constantly working on the U.S. and they are the ones, I think, the communists were spectacularly successful in doing as much damage as they've done. But I don't see Russia. It's really remarkable when you think about it, honestly. We spent half of the show talking about the moon landing and racing the Soviets to the moon. Russia is not in the top 10 economies in the world. That's an amazing statement. Not in the top 10. Considering the size of their military, what kind of burden that must be and why it's essentially hollow. So I'm not worried about them. China, on the other hand, is openly, clearly doing everything they can to back this up. I've said this so many times it just bears saying again, I guess. They will never catch us militarily. They will never catch us militarily. It's just not in the cards. They may eventually have one or conceivably two flat deck carriers that they will operate as a cargo cult because it looks like an American carrier, but they don't know how to do force protection. Their Army and their Navy don't talk to each other. Ours talk to each other. We just fight on a football field and insult each other, but nevertheless, when this goes, that's it. Thanks, Bill, but your thinking on this subject is at least 10 years out of date. Enlighten me, Rich. Enlighten me. I can't wait. I'm looking forward to having my out-of-date information brought up to speed. So China is never going to catch us. But if they can make sure that our 11 carrier battle groups are staffed by people who are mostly fighting climate change and whose number one training purpose is to make sure that the pronouns are correct, then you've essentially sunk 11 carrier battle groups at a much, 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 much lower price. So China's doing everything they can. When you have enough money, when you've got the second biggest economy in the world, you can write some pretty big checks. And they have. And the thing that's most disgusting about the things like the Bidens is how cheap they got them. $5 million to control the $5 million to be able to have essentially veto power. What does Russia gain by the war on Ukraine? Well, you might want to ask Vlad about that one, Rich, because I know one thing, and I know that it was Putin who did the invasion. So if you're saying they don't gain anything by going to war on Ukraine, then that doesn't make any sense. And if you're saying they do gain something by going to war with Ukraine, they have not achieved their objectives. It's pretty clear they were openly stating that they were going to do it in 3 or 4 days. It was going to take a week or two. Angela Day says more secure borders. Do you think their border's more secure now than it was before? This aggression has cost them. Forget the economic sanctions, which are crippling. This has been an unmitigated catastrophe for Russia in every way imaginable. Economically, militarily, propaganda-wise, in every single way possible. There's no way to explain why you would do what he did other than the Stockton Rush syndrome, which is he believed it. He had people telling him, oh, no, the Ukrainians are just running around just waiting to greet us with open arms. It'll be a 3-day war. They went to war to recover lost Russian territory. Well, Rich, here's the thing about that. You're saying that Ukraine is Russian territory, and the Ukrainians are saying no, and the world community has been saying no, and they have their own flag, and Ukraine has been a country for virtually as long as Russia. And since it's called Ukraine and not Russia, then it's not Russian territory. Russians can consider it Russian territory, or they may want it to be their territory, but the fact that it's called Ukraine and not Russia means it's not their territory. And they can want it all they want to. Putin's approval rates in Russia have improved. Well, maybe that's true. Maybe it's true, or maybe it's not true. But I'll tell you one thing, 200,000 killed is affecting a lot of families. I have relatives in Russia. I have relatives who lived in Sochi. And they say there are no young men to be found in the country anywhere. Anyone who could have gotten out has gone to Bali or somewhere else. So where's the gain here? Is Russia more feared now than it was before? No. It's part of Russia now? It's not part of Russia. No, it's a country. And they're fighting for their country. Look at maps from before the USSR. There's always been... Look, if you're saying that Ukraine is Russian territory, then so is Belarus, so is Kazakhstan, so is Uzbekistan, so is Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. So is Finland. All of these have at one time or another been ruled by the Soviet Empire. And so if you're saying that all of that is all Russia, legally Russia, you got a few 100 million people to convince of this. Just because the Russians took territory and had it for a while doesn't mean that it belonged to them. There is a Russia. There's a greater Russia. Belarus essentially means little Russia. There's Great Russia, White Russia. There's Russia is Russia. But this business of the fact that we once had enough military power to force these countries that I mentioned into becoming SSRs, Soviet socialist republics, just because we had the remnants of the Red Army to force Poland and Bulgaria, Romania, all of these countries were forced into the communist orbit by force of arms. It doesn't mean that they belong to Russia. They never belonged to Russia, ever. And by the way, when Russia occupied all those territories, when Ukraine was under the Kremlin's control, they didn't call it Russia. It was called the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. It still had its own identity because it's a place, it's a location, it's a people. Language is different. The culture is different. It's not Russia. And saying that it is doesn't make it so. It just doesn't. It does not make it so. So there you go. There is no possible way to explain that Russia's in better shape now than they were before this happened. People used to fear Russia. Nobody fears them now. And there's not many of them left in terms of their fighting capability. The Wagner Group has taken 40,000, 60,000 casualties out of 80,000, three-quarters, 75% casualties, and half of those dead. That's not a win, man. That's not a win in any way, shape, or form. And if Putin is this giant mastermind, how come you have this rebellion where the private mercenary army that Putin has been using for plausible deniability rebels against the government, makes a move, and then a day later or two, there's a phone call made, and it's like, let's just call the whole thing off. Prigozhin launched that coup attempt a month and a half ago because Russia shelled his troops. And he's convinced they did it on purpose. So saying that, listen, Rich, you're going to have to start using some evidence, because this is not a he said, she said. I know which way the tanks went. I know that that Ukraine is a country that is recognized around the world. It's recognized in the Olympics, recognized by everybody. So these are absolute sudden. These are 100% factual statements. So where are your factual statements that says that this belongs to Russian countries? Those are Soviet countries, not Russian countries. Correct. So where's your justification? I just spent 10 minutes telling you that Ukraine exists as a separate entity and provided a lot of evidence, but you claim it's Russian territory. So where's your evidence that it's Russia? Not that it's been controlled by Russia, that it's Russia. Where's your evidence?
Yeah, even in one of my college classes, we were talking about that, and it's only along the Russian border of a few of their territories that people in Ukraine really identify as Russian. You get further away from that, and people stop identifying as Russian.
That's right, because that territory's been going back and forth from the beginning. So I just don't get it. Listen to Robert Barnes if you want evidence. Well, I don't listen to Robert Barnes, Rich. You listen to Robert Barnes, so give me some evidence. It's pretty simple. Ray says, Bill Whittle, you're embarrassing yourself. Stop listening. More money to Ukraine. That'll solve everything. I didn't mention anything about money. I didn't mention anything about weapons. I didn't mention anything about support. I didn't mention anything about politics. I mentioned that it was a sovereign nation, and that's where the discussion is today, and that's where it's going to stay today. And I'm waiting for some evidence that it's not. And I get the feeling I'm going to be waiting for a long time. So since I'm never going to get an answer on that because there is no answer, I'll just move on. Yeah, Putin's he's our best friend. He's the defender of Western civilization. Steve Young, Professor Michelle Goodwin, Constitutional Law, Georgetown University, author of Policing the Womb, testifying before the Senate Judiciary Committee regarding pending legislation on abortion, would not answer Senator John Kennedy's question about abortion up to the moment of birth, and instead, she sought to school the Judiciary Committee on the 14th Amendment, stating, "Let me clarify what the 14th Amendment says in its first sentence." I'm done with this argument. When somebody says, go look at this video, and that's their argument, then that's a lose. Let me clarify what the 14th Amendment says in the first sentence. That citizens of this United States are individuals that are born. That's what our Constitution says. That is not what the 14th says. She added a period after the word born and just stopped. Yes, they did that with the Commerce Clause. They're very good at this kind of punctuating their way into totalitarianism. The sentence continues on. The paraphrase by a law professor and her statement of "that's what our Constitution says" is an egregious example of the Democrats' rhetorical assault on our Constitution. Should this lawyer be disbarred? Well, disbarred or not, I don't think they should be confirmed for anything. Look, there are people out there, many of them in this country, who despise the Constitution, and Barack Obama basically said this openly. He said the problem with the Constitution is that it limits the power of government. He said it means it limits our power to help everybody and buy them free stuff. But basically he said that that what the Constitution is a series of restraints rather than a series of liberations. That's a really, really important point to understand and discuss. So, since it's the second to last question, let's go ahead and discuss it. Does a government, do you think the government has do you want to live in a world where a government determines what freedoms you can have and disperses them? Or do you want to live in a world or a society where you're assumed that all of your rights are inherent in you, that every human being has them, that you are not granted freedoms by a group of dim-witted student body president weenies, but that is just the essential quality of life, is you should be able to do what you want to do, go your own way, make your own destiny, steer your own course, so long as you don't interfere with somebody else. So those are the two choices, and the Constitution is there to provide defense for people against their own government. That's the genius of the American system of government. The American system of government is designed to prevent the government from taking power. It's unheard of. No wonder nobody else understands it. I remember when I started doing eject back 2002 or 3, somewhere around in there, 3 or 4, the EU wrote a constitution. Our constitution is 4,440 words long. Theirs was hundreds of thousands of words long. And the EU constitution, I'm not making this up, regulated things like, in order to sell cucumbers, how long did they have to be and what curvature did they have to have? That was in the Constitution. And so basically the European attitude was, well, we want to make sure that we grant all of the freedoms, and we want to make sure that we get every one of these freedoms into the document that we want people to have. And the United States argument is completely different than that. It's like, you don't get to tell us what freedoms we have. We have all these freedoms. We have the freedoms to do what we want to. We don't have the right to commit crimes. We should be caught and punished for committing crimes. But other than that, we get to do whatever we want to. You don't get to tell me what to do. That's simple. That's the difference. I get to tell you what to do. You don't get to tell me what to do. Which side of that argument are you on? Honestly, can we not ever have a Republican candidate say this? Which side of the argument are you on? Are you on the I'm going to tell you what to do side of the argument, or are you on the don't tell me what to do side of the argument? Because that's the difference between the two parties. And it's the difference between the United States and socialism, capitalism and socialism. It's the difference between freedom and totalitarianism. Do you want to? I'm going to tell people what to do. Don't tell me what to do. Which one of those two appeals to you? And a lot of people find that I'm going to tell you what to do appeals to you. And what I find about those people, as a general rule, is that they're always the losers. They're always the strays and the wounded ones, the left out ones. Hitler wanted to be an architect, and he thought he was a great artist, and undoubtedly thought he was a great composer as well. And when it turned out that he was not good as an artist and not good as an architect, and whatever natural talent he may or may not have had, he just liked sleeping to noon every day and ranting and raving about things. So he became a I want to tell you what to do kind of person, because he can't succeed in the world. And neither could Lenin. Lenin had arguably never had a job, but Lenin was a lawyer. I think he tried 41 cases or something like that, and he lost 40 of them. All he ever did was sit around and bitch and moan about why he wasn't running things, until finally he got enough people to listen to him. Then he did have the means to tell people what to do. And as a result of that, 20 million people, 20,000 people were killed in order to satisfy this genetic defect in the human condition. It's not just in humans, by the way. It's in all mammals, especially in primates. There's usually an alpha male, and the alpha male determines who gets to eat in what order, who gets to mate in what order, and he reigns completely supreme, tells everybody what to do, until a younger alpha male who's ruthless enough comes along and kills him, in which case the rinse cycle begins again. That's how animals work, and we're animals. That's how every government in the history of the world has ever worked, until a bunch of people got together who were in a combination of being part of Europe and yet removed from Europe, and having the philosophical basis that came from Europe, and at the same time looking at this just gigantic expanse of possibility, and you finally had a group of people who, this is why the American Revolution is so remarkable, and this is when the American Revolution was the only revolution that I'm aware of ever that came from the top down. These were the richest, most well-known people in America. These weren't the scum and villainy of the world. Hitler was sleeping in the open. He spent 20 years in hostels. He was a complete loser. All of the people that joined the SA before the SS and before Hitler even came to power, they're all losers. They were drunks and bullies. That's who he recruited. Same for Lenin. Lenin was a failed everything. Stalin was a Georgian bandit. And these people gained power because they had to tell people what to do, and they had to tell people what to do because they couldn't make it on their own. They're just plain defective. Actually, they're not defective. We're the ones that are defective. And so there's your alpha. Look at history. History is the history of silverbacks, and that's how it goes until you get to 1776, and then all of a sudden you get, I don't know, 40 silverbacks in the same room, and instead of them killing each other, which is what happened in Soviet Union and in China and all the rest of these places, instead of the palace coups, these 40 silverbacks got together and said, you know what, maybe it's a good idea if we don't have silverbacks running everything. How do you think the American Revolution was able to accomplish that philosophically? How do you think that the richest, most powerful people in the country were able to get together and agree that the country should not be governed by the rich and powerful? How do you think that happened? It's kind of a remarkable thing, you know? It's not just ideologically remarkable, it's historically astonishing, and most of all, it's biologically virtually impossible. How did that happen? The only explanation I can come up with looking at history is the only reason that the 40 silverbacks got together and decided no more silverbacks is because I think for the first time and only time in human history, the founders of the American experiment were confronted with so much abundance. There was just so much there that you could take all you wanted and you couldn't even make a dent on it. It was no longer a zero-sum game where I'm going to take power at somebody else's expense and you're going to take power at my expense. You're facing a new world, a new planet. You don't have to tell people what to do in a world like that. You can just go off on your own and be happy and be successful. And so the silverbacks decided, yeah, okay. The rule of the silverback is what's caused us to go to war, and it's what's caused all of the misery in the world, all of these European wars and all of these other tribal wars in Africa and Europe, everywhere, Asia, all of it. It's all just the silverbacks deciding, well, I'm a silverback and I want this, like I want Ukraine, so I'm going to go take it. And it doesn't matter how many other people we kill doing it, doesn't matter. I want it, so I'm going to go do it. And they do. And here's a government that was designed to prevent that from happening. So of course, the totalitarians, the silverbacks, the people who have to be top dog and little top dog as well, they're the ones I hate the most. These minor DMV type control freaks. They hate the Constitution and are doing everything they can to change it. And because it's so powerful, and I keep having to qualify, this is the thing I hate most about living in this day and age, is having to qualify things like it used to be obeyed, it used to be a free country, blah, 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 you used to be able to say what's on your mind, you still can. They understand the power of the Constitution, and so the way they get around the Constitution is by quoting the Constitution and punctuating the Constitution, because those words are in the Constitution. And they can read the Constitution and read those words that you just mentioned, or read Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce between the states, period. You can read that sentence, and yes, those words are there, but there's no period there between the states, foreign powers, and the Indian tribes. So unless you're a state or a foreign power or an Indian tribe, Congress can't touch you. That's not what they want. They want the period there. Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce among the people, period. No, there's no period there. The period changes everything, just like in your example. Should this person be disbarred? I think they should be kicked out of the country, but that's just because my feeling is if you want to change the country, then change it. Don't subvert it. And the fact that you have to subvert it is telling me that you know, as well as I know, that nobody wants what you're selling. This is like an argument about gun control. You want gun control in this country? You want to limit guns? Fantastic. Repeal the Second Amendment. It's that simple, honestly. It's just that simple. Go out there, make the 28th Amendment. The 28th Amendment hereby repeals the Second Amendment. Go, get the majority of states to have that happen, pass it the way you'd pass any other amendment, and you got your gun control. Just do that. That's all you have to do. Why aren't you doing that? Why aren't you out there trying to overturn the Second Amendment? Well, you're not doing that because you know that you can't do it. And the reason you're censoring people with tech platforms is because you know that you can't pass an amendment that makes it legal for you to censor people and take them away and put them in a basement like they did in the Soviet Union, which happens to be the Lubyanka, which happens to be the home of the FSB, and where Vladimir Putin sat a fair amount of his time, right over the execution chambers in the Lubyanka. I know this because I've spent a fair amount of time there. So there you go. Of course, she's being disingenuous, and this is a small case. To me, the thing that boggles my mind is how a single Republican could have voted for Justice Jackson when asked, "What is a woman?" She replied, "I'm not a biologist." That's lying under oath. She's lying. She's perjuring herself. Clearly perjuring herself. Of course she knows what a woman is. She's perjuring herself during her confirmation hearings. How come nobody said that? It's not, look, if she had come out and said, I believe that people should have the right to be able to change their gender and all of the things that the transgender movement wants. If she'd come out and said all that, she would then be at least telling the truth and be advocating a position I completely disagree with, but she'd be advocating it fairly. To duck the question is perjury. Of course she knows what a woman is. Of course she knows. She just can't say it. Because if she says it, she'll lose her base. How do you confirm somebody to the Supreme Court who just plain lies like that? That we always get so in the weeds on these things. It's just so freaking obvious to me. It's just like, what is the matter with you? That should have been the end of the hearing right there. Right there. I'm not a biologist. Well, Justice or Ms. Jackson, here's my opinion then as a senator who's here sitting in a confirmation hearing. If you're saying that you have to be a biologist to know what a woman is, and you're not a biologist, then you're not fit to rule on women's issues, because you can't make a ruling on anything that affects women because you don't know what one is. You already have admitted you don't have the qualifications to know what a woman is. You don't have a degree in biology. So since so much of the legislation you're going to be facing deals with specific issues of women's rights and so on, you've just disqualified yourself. If you can't tell what a woman is, then how can you make a ruling on something like Title IX? You can't even define the term. Done. Nope. No, can't do that. Last one for the night. Marusha Dark. Hey, Bill, I've been giving a lot of thought to these last few weeks to your Super Bowl analogy, the one about the coach of the winning team admitting they really lost. I think what troubles me about it is the ease with which it can be turned against genuine whistleblowers and other first-hand accounts. Okay. Case in point, James O'Keefe built Project Veritas on the back of catching high-level insiders live on camera saying the quiet part out loud. Wants to stop someone from applying your analogy to him and dismissing those hot takes the same way you dismiss the head coach's admission. Marusha, I'll finish reading the sentence but I am saying that a coach saying that we lost the Super Bowl when actually we won it, I'm using that as an example of something that is so absurd and unreasonable. The fact that that person's trying to lie their way out of it, I'm not making a defense of somebody's attesting to something. I'm using it to mock it. What's to stop someone from applying your analogy to him and dismissing these hot takes the same way you dismiss the head coach's admission? Or take, for example, your case about Lincoln or the atom bombs in Japan. Your primary evidence in defense of the mainstream narrative in both instances is the words of the people who are ostensibly in the know. We did this because XYZ. What makes these examples different than the head coach such that you believe them? Well, Marusha, the people who say that the atomic bomb was needed to stop the war in Japan are people like the people that led the attack on Pearl Harbor. These are high-ranking Japanese officials, and they know what they're doing, and they're right. Their testimony coincides with historical, factual data. A coach of the Philadelphia Eagles who said that he won the game is not backed by historical data or factual evidence. That's why I chose it. The difference between the two is that one of them is provably right and the other one is provably wrong, which is why I chose it as an example. The evidence that the Chiefs beat the Eagles so enormously outweighs a statement saying that the Eagles beat the Chiefs that I find it useful to point out how ridiculous it is. If you're saying that the people who say that the atom bomb should have been dropped are just people saying it, they're not. The person who I'm look the decision to drop the bombs was an American decision. The decision to end the war was not a Japanese decision. It was one person's decision, and that person was Hirohito. And Hirohito said verbatim, openly and verbatim, in his speech where he surrendered his nation, he said, "We are now facing a new and terrible weapon, which will essentially destroy our country as we see it." That is why we have. He never said that's why we surrender. He said that's why we've accepted the terms of the Potsdam Agreement, which meant they surrender. The person who's making the statement is the person who made the decision. it's not hearsay evidence if it comes from the Emperor of Japan. It's not another guy. It's not Joe versus Frank if you're talking about the Emperor of Japan, because he's the only guy that can make that decision. So when he says we ended the war because of the atomic bombs, that has weight to it. If a coach who's coaching the Eagles says we won, and therefore it's proof because somebody who worked at NASA says we didn't go to the moon, and that's proof too, well, then that just shows you how ridiculous the whole thing is. The entire premise is predicated on what position are you. I used the example as the most obvious example I could think of somebody making a sworn testimony to something that was so 100% provably false. That's what the argument is how absurd it is. Well, somebody in NASA said we didn't go to the moon. Well, I guess that proves it then. Well, what if somebody in the Philadelphia Eagles said that they won the Super Bowl? Does that prove that they won the Super Bowl? No, it's ridiculous. Why not other testimony from people as much in the know, and in some cases even the same people who provide different answers when they didn't think they'll face consequences for it, such as in a private letter or a closed-door meeting, actually we really did this for reasons A, B, C. I don't know how much more muddying of the waters that can accomplish here, but if you can't see the difference between me using an example of somebody stating something to be true that is the most obvious example of something that is not true, and equating that by saying, well, then how can you then say that something is true since you've just made this argument? You've completely inverted and misunderstood exactly what I've said by a perfect 180 degrees. You've gotten exactly wrong what I was trying to say. Precisely wrong. The reason the Eagles coach is not credible is because he's obviously not telling the truth. That doesn't apply to somebody who is obviously telling the truth. And that's why I chose it. Anyway, it's time for me to go home. So, happy Moon Day to everybody. And we got through all of our questions. So this show's made possible by the members at BillWhittle.com who keep shows like this on the air through thick and thin, and to whom we are always eternally grateful. That's why we always mention them at the end of every show. We will be back on Monday with some actual progress on the entertainment side of things. So we will see you Monday on the Stratosphere Studio. And we will see you right here next time on your very own, one and only, completely unique, artisanally selected, steel-cut Stratosphere Launch Show.